Okay, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board. It is Friday, May 13th, and the time is 9:03. We're going to jump back in the agenda, but before we do that, I'd like to call roll. So if you could just say you're here. Holly Kaiser? Here. Todd Borges?
Here.
Karen Chang?
Here.
Gilda Dominguez?
Here.
Gilda? Debbie Snow?
Here.
Amy
Here.
White?
Here.
And I'm here. Gilda, could I have you let us know your current address and location? And if there are any public members with you?
I am currently at the Galera Family Education Center, 427 West Carroll Avenue, room number 2 in Glendora, California. And there are no public members attending here with me.
Okay. All right, if you could turn to tab number 5, you'll see that the board meeting calendar is listed there, and we have a meeting coming up on August 11th, 12th, and we have to discuss the location for that. Typically, in the past, we've alternated between Northern and Southern California. I presume this might be the time to go to Southern California if we're allowed to travel. I kind of need some advice from the board staff whether we can do that.
We do have approval to travel, and considering news reports about the fall, it may actually be more advised to go south in August rather than in October. So that might be your better option, is to do an August Southern California board meeting and then potentially Sacramento or teleconference completely in October. So just depending on circumstances.
Would that be in Los Angeles or San Diego?
It could be Los Angeles or San Diego, so that's really kind of up to the board.
San Diego has seemed to be more accessible.
Yeah.
Recently, as far as securing sites and accommodations.
And hotels that are reasonably priced, yes.
Yeah.
Do you think public access is easier in San Diego?
It is, and also the expensive hotels. We tend to find LA becomes hard almost every time I've been there. The last few times there's some sort of convention or conference, so everything's booked and everything's really expensive. But that's just personal experience for pre-pandemic, so.
Yeah, and I would say if there's a preference for Los Angeles over San Diego, we can look at both and we can use San Diego as a second alternative.
Yeah.
I think it's likely that, well, based on experience, I don't know how it is today, but I know the last few years that we were doing meetings, it was getting more and more difficult to use the LA area, the LAX area especially.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can remember we went to, you guys were at Mount Sac. I can ask them again. They just built this big student center and stadium, so.
I remember that was complicated
It
to
was
get there,
complicated
though.
to get there, though, and the hotel. The only problem is the hotel. I don't know.
Okay. Well, why don't we make a plan for it to be Southern California at the moment, and then we can start putting out requests for bids and see if we end up in LA, San Diego, or Mount
Sac. I think it was, they didn't charge you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That might be a good option.
Yeah, they have this thing where state and community events, they don't charge.
So let's plan for August to be Southern California, and then we'll try to coordinate which can be a most viable option. I have had it before where we tried to do Los Angeles and we ended up in Ontario once. There was literally nothing. There was 2 conventions at the same time, so it just depends.
Okay, we'll tentatively slate October for Sacramento.
Yeah, if not full teleconference, depending on how it goes. So we'll play it the health and safety ear. Is how we'll play it.
That sounds good. Okay, we have some committee reports that we'd like to go over this morning. If Ms. Kaiser is prepared, we'd like to start with the Enforcement Ad Hoc Committee.
I'm not the chair. Do you want me to? does that
It
matter?
just says that here on my book, so,
That's okay. I mean, it's
if
just- I
there's
don't know
somebody
if
else,
we're-
if Debbie would be.
Holly, I'm happy for you to do it.
Okay, let me think for a second. What,
Okay, all right, would you like to just give us a synopsis of, what happened yesterday?
I'm happy to.
Very helpful. We got through some of the ones we're working on. And I learned, we both,
Thanks for interrupting you. This is,
we're
is there a tab that has the information
Yes.
about
ENF.
DNF? Okay.
It's the back tab. I think that's where it starts.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we made a lot of progress. Holly and I both learned a lot. And this is going to be very useful to update these procedures.
Do you want me to see something?
That's about all
Yeah,
I can think of at the moment.
I know, I hadn't thought about it, summary, but I think I can do this just quickly thinking about it right now. There were a lot of technical things, like, making language gender neutral and things like that, but the more substantive things were, let's see, sorry, I have to review this as well. So sorry.
Holly, if you'd like to give a background just on.
Could
the
you,
guidelines?
because I feel like I'm going to have to think about it a little bit more.
It's not a problem. I think it was a great opportunity for board staff to meet once again with the enforcement committee. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. I think it was a great opportunity for board staff to once again meet with our enforcement committee and go over just a good overview of enforcement. And I think from time to time, this board has expressed a desire to have different board members on the committee so that they could understand the processes and understand everything that goes into enforcement, especially by the time it comes to you. There's several steps that have taken place, and several individuals that have been part of that process. So in addition to providing the committee with an overview, the committee also got a chance to interact with some of our enforcement staff. And the goal of yesterday's meeting was to look at our disciplinary guidelines, which is a high priority for us to update our guidelines and get them updated, approved by the board, and then referenced as part of our regulations in OAL. With the Office of Administrative Law, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry I was blanking, but we did cover so much. But for example, we'd be talking about just specific pieces of language, like employer versus contracting agency, et cetera, and all the ramifications of making sure that everything is up to date. So I think that's why it's hard for us to summarize, because it was a new experience for us, and we're looking forward to continuing the process. And anyway, thank you for helping, Paul.
You're welcome.
And I'm sorry, I just found my notes, but I've gone over some of this in the past, but it's very helpful to see the whole process and what is involved between that the board staff goes through to determine what gets referred and what is handled at the desk. And I'm impressed with all you all do and look forward to learning more.
Can I just ask if we are entertaining changing the disciplinary guidelines in a formal way?
No, not at this point. I think we have just started to kind of dive into them, and we're at the beginning stages at this point of reviewing them.
Yeah.
And the goal is for the committee to present a recommendation to the board, so to actually bring a product that the board could look at that's almost ready to go.
So are we looking, we're not looking at a motion at this point?
Not today.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of changes, and I remember disciplinary guidelines are, it's not an easy task to try to amend this.
That's true. It's not it, and it can be a rather lengthy process. I don't know of any board that has been able to get through them quickly. So, I think we're all committed. We're all ready to dive into this, roll up our sleeves and go through these, and hopefully we'll have a good product for you maybe a couple of meetings from now, if all goes well.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, I'd like to ask Mr. Borges if he would summarize or give us an update on the hearing aid dispensers committee meeting yesterday.
Sure. So it's under tab HAD 3 and 4 in the binder. Under HAD 3, essentially we were looking at two different things. First, adjusting the allowable content for CEUs to include product content, and also looking to see how we can carve out or limit some of that content to make sure that it's not including promotional materials, marketing, things that aren't directly related to, as we listed, programming, troubleshooting of equipment, devices, or other products of particular manufacturer or company only as it relates to benefiting the client's hearing and functional use. We debated back and forth on how many hours to include for that. We were looking at 4 hours of the 12 that can be slotted towards the product CEUs, if you will, and also how we can write the verbiage to make sure that the courses are strictly on the actual product and not on marketing or launching new product or demonstrating the marketability of the equipment. After talking or hearing from Audiology Online and her concern of, what does that mean, so they know what seminars they would want to present to the board for approval, I think we need to maybe talk with some of the stakeholders, them in particular, see what it is they are looking for, what we're looking for, make sure we decide on language that's very clear, so that way they have a better understanding of what to submit to the board, so that they're not wasting their time and money on things that, we're just going to say no to. I think it will also make it much easier for those individuals on the board that are vetting these programs. If we have, understood language of what we're looking for, it'll make it much easier on them to be able to vet the course and decide, is it viable or not for us to use. So I think that's something that we should probably take a look at to make sure we're getting a much clearer understanding, making sure that the courses are not basic, make sure that they're actually advanced, courses that we're offering. So I think we should take some time to have a conversation with them and potentially others, just to get a better idea of what we're looking for and that they have an understanding of what it is, and we have some sort of parity of knowledge, if that makes sense. And then the other, under HAD 4, basically the second thing we were discussing was primarily just, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sharice, but essentially just making sure the language between the, the hearing aid dispensers and the audiology are in line. So they're essentially adjusting the language for the regulations to make sure that they are in line with both sets, so they say the same thing. That essentially in a nutshell. Do you want to have any questions for me? Okay. Did I miss anything? I covered pretty well. What'd I miss?
Just to clarify, the 4 hours we were talking about, I thought that was related to units for serving at workshops or proctoring exams. Did we decide on a unit restriction for manufacture courses?
We didn't actually, we talked about 4 just as a number.
Okay.
You know, sort of an initial number that was thrown out there. The conversation about the exams, the examiners and the workshops, that was a different conversation.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. But I know 4 seems to be a happy number. I don't know, but I would like to take a look at that as well. The number of hours, whatever we land on. We're required 12 right now total, whether we want to allow 6 or 4. I think back on when we were talking about live versus recorded and how important it is to have those live hours for that give and take. And that is absolutely important for this type of a course, to be able to talk to the person about the product, and if they have questions and troubleshooting and case studies and things like that. I think that would actually be very beneficial to be able to take those courses live and get that give and take for sure. Any other questions?
I was just going to clarify that the one change that's in there, but that was talked about at a prior meeting and yesterday's meeting, is that the 4 hours is for indirect or related care. So it used to be 3, and we're proposing 4. So there is that 4 as well. 4 does seem to be the number.
Okay, let me summarize the 2 items that were discussed yesterday in the Audiology Practice Committee. Number 3, under tab number 3, you'll see that we discussed the very complex issue of trying to determine how to determine appropriate tasks for audiology aids. Our goal was to bring some structure, some boundaries for acceptable tasks and degrees of appropriate supervision. It was ultimately decided that 1 to 2 members of the Audiology Practice Committee would work with board staff with a goal of developing categories of acceptable tasks and supervision types for the next board meeting. Our goal, of course, in the long run is to move toward perhaps developing a new license type, namely an audiology assistant category, with the educational and CEU requirements associated with that. That's essential, in a nutshell, what took us an hour to talk about. The second issue under tab number 4 is we looked at earlier discussions of Business and Profession Code Section 2532.2B2 that requires an audiology RPE to involve 12 months of supervised professional training after the completion of all required coursework. So that apparently causes considerable hardships, not only for students, but for the programs themselves, the AUD programs. In our Sunset report, we suggested allowing 12 months to be gained partly in earlier program clinical rotations, but my understanding from yesterday's conversation is that there are still some concerns by the legislative consultants regarding those proposed changes. So we are not at a place yet where we can move forward with regulations or about this issue. So it's kind of a stay tuned situation at this point. So that's my update. I would like to open the floor for any board discussion of any of these reports. I'm not seeing any board discussion or need for that. So I'd like to ask the moderator to open public comment via WebEx.
We are now open for public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests for comments. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment here, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
Thank you. There are no public members here with me.
Okay, thank you everyone for summarizing the meetings yesterday. We're going to jump down the agenda now because we already covered items 6 and 7 yesterday, and jump to item number 8, update and discussion regarding the board's 2022 Sunset Review, board testimony at the Joint Sunset Review Oversight Committee hearing on March 10th, 2022, and the board's response to the issues identified in the committee's Sunset background paper. So I believe Mr. Sanchez is going to.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Agenda item 8 is an update on the board sunset review and where we are. I think the last time we talked about our presentation to the Joint Sunset Review Oversight Committee. Since that time, during that time, we were actually responding to some of the background issues that were brought up in the background paper that was provided to the board. Following the Sunset Review Oversight hearing, the executive officer and the assistant executive officer began meeting with the committee staff to address any issues raised by the background paper, issues raised by legislators during the hearing, and discuss potential amendments to the board's Practice Act that may get included in the board's sunset bill. During this time, we also worked with our board chair and vice chair to respond to the committee's questions and provided them with written responses on April 11th. Currently, Assembly Bill 2686 includes some of the board's requested changes to its Practice Act, and I will continue to work with Charisse and the committee staff on the inclusion of the remaining requests that we have. After the bill has been approved by both houses of the legislature and signed by the governor, the board's new sunset date and changes to the Practice Act will go into effect. So as Dr. Raggio mentioned, and as you will see later on when we update you on AB 2686, not all of our requests have been added to that language, but I think we're still working with the committee staff. We're having really good conversations. I think the consultant is engaged, asking questions that I think are good questions that we need to work out so that we can hopefully get these amendments that we're requesting. And I think they're very good changes that will help us and solidify our Practice Act and make good changes for the various causes that we're looking at. That's all I have as far as the update on the Sunset Report.
Okay. When do you anticipate further conversations about the 2532, the 12-month? Is that just ongoing?
Yes, it's ongoing, and so currently, right now, it's working its way through the Assembly. The other big chance to make a lot of policy changes, which will probably happen in the Senate. So we'll continue working with them until that point, and then that's, I think, the point at which they'll make some decisions on this. So we have a little time. I believe there's a recess in between there somewhere as well, where we get to continue working with that and talking with everyone. And then also addressing any questions legislators as well might have. So it's got a lot of layers, a lot of conversations, and I think we'll get there. So I want to echo Paul's saying that I think this much engagement with consultants is great. They really want to know our issues about our practices, the professions, the educational pipeline. This amount of engagement is really encouraging. So
is that unusual?
I think so. A lot of times it's hurry up and get through this process, and so this is, I think, a really good thing. So,
okay.
I think it also speaks to the work that the board put into the Sunset Review this time around. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into it, especially, you know, Dr. Raggio, Holly Kaiser, all of that, all those hours that we spent working in our little war room in our building. I think it's been really helpful, and I think we all did our homework, and we're going to come up with a good product.
Yeah, and I think it also says a lot. You know, we bring up issues, we talk about them here, we talk about them with stakeholders. We use a good public open process to engage our stakeholders and get the input. So we're not just pulling random things out of our back pocket when we get there. So I think it's going to have a good outcome. We just got to wait and continue the conversations, so.
Okay, well, we have all the confidence in you guys. So I would like to open the discussion to the rest of the board. If there are any other concerns about the Sunset Review Report or the update about it?
And just so everyone knows, as part of the attachment, you'll see the background paper. It may look familiar, but I would go ahead and read those responses because they have been updated.
Oh.
You can see what our responses are to the committee.
Okay, that's helpful. No board discussion? If not, I'd like to open it up for public comment via WebEx.
We are now open for public comment on this matter. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
No one for public comment.
I'm not sure I understood that.
I don't
Oh,
think
there
she
was
has
no-
any public members.
I
Yeah, there are
think
no
that's what she
public
said too, but for the record, Okay, thank you, Gilda. Okay, moving to item number 9, we're actually not able to move to item 9. That is a time certain for some guest speakers to join us at 11 o'clock. So we're going to move to item number 10, discussion on the board's communication methods with licensees. And Sharice, were you going to discuss that?
Absolutely. So this was requested at a prior board meeting to have a discussion about the board's communication methods with its licensees. And so we wanted to go ahead and bring this issue up and talk about what the board is currently using. So currently, of course, we have our website. It is a option that is low cost but relies on licensees to check it. It also relies on internal staff to update it. Voluntary opt-in email notification list. So the board has 3 different listservs, is what they're called. They're email listservs. One is for receiving agenda news, one is for receiving disciplinary actions, and the other is for receiving legislation and regulation changes. You can always go to the board's Contact Us tab on our website, and that will get you to join those listservs. When we send out agendas, when we send out legislative summaries, when we send out regulation issues, those go through those listservs. And currently you can opt into them. So you can put your email in there, it'll add you to the list. It goes on in the background, board staff doesn't even see it. So that is the way that you can opt in. Now, the other one is a voluntary opt-out email list. So the board does not currently have the statutory authority to require licensees to provide their email, but the board collects emails as part of the application process. So that's been going on for quite some time, but it's honestly, I think it's only about 47% of the licensees that we have via email that way. During the pandemic, we quickly realized we had no method to quickly and efficiently talk to our licensees. So we went ahead and used what we had available to us to create licensee listservs. They're obviously voluntary. They opted in by giving us their email as part of the application process. And of course, at the bottom of each email has an unsubscribe. So if they don't want to hear from us again, they can always do so. But that is voluntary. Now, you'll notice later on today in agenda item 13, our sunset review does have the authority to require emails if you have one. So we're never going to make you go get an email to become a licensee or stay a licensee. But if you have one, the statutory changes in our sunset bill will now require you to provide it. So, of course, in implementing that, we'll look at different low-cost and effective ways to do that and to accrue those emails. But for now, you can also go to the board's website. At the top, it says, are you not receiving emails from the board about COVID? I'm sure I'll change that soon to not just be about COVID, but about, are you not receiving emails from the board? To give us your email, and we can manually add it. So change is coming in the future. So I think somebody had mentioned we shouldn't have the opt-in listservs, we should have an opt-out option. So that is coming. It's just we didn't have the statutory authority to require it yet, but soon enough we will. The other option is, of course, postal mail. It's quite expensive. We get a lot of returned mail. A lot of people need to do address updates. That is one way to do things, but it is somewhat cost prohibitive. There are sometimes easy methods to do a postcard, but they usually have to be pretty short and sweet, and usually we're leading them to a website. So I've seen where other boards move to a renewal postcard, but there's not very much information on the postcard. So it's not quite the opportunity to provide the legislative and regulatory updates or policy updates that I think people were looking towards. But those are the options we have currently. After that, there are quite a few different ways. It just depends on staff resources. So some boards have a variety of communication methods, a lot of which, for lack of a better word, are a little more labor intensive. So some people do newsletters, some people do an annual update. There's a variety of different things. Oftentimes, at least from my experience, there's a lot of work that goes into them. Readership isn't always that high. And usually they're posted onto the website as well. So again, somebody's going to the website, or we're sending out via the same email list a link to that thing. So those are the kind of ones we have now. I don't know that you want to go too much further. The utility of some other things out there, such as social media, they're kind of iffy. I haven't always seen the best results with that. So that's kind of where we are now. We are always looking for new things. The Department of Consumer Affairs is always trying to apprise us of new things, but there is somewhat of a need also to think about social media for government use in general and maybe develop that more before we endeavor on something that's going to be quite labor intensive, so that we would be using it to the best advantage and not just having it to have it, you know. So, any questions?
I have a question. Just out of curiosity, how many people voluntarily opt out of the list when you put them in? Do you have that number or percentage?
I don't. I think it keeps a number, but I don't know how to find that on my listserv, actually. I'd have to ask my IT folks, but I could ask them.
Yeah.
I know currently that's the numbers that are still in, and I don't think we've lost that many.
Okay.
So, because it's been around the same number of 14,000 or so.
Okay. And if we were to use social media, do we have to get permission from DCA or make it put into regs, or like what are other people doing?
Some others have created it and started it and asked staff to monitor it. The utility of it becomes a question. Oftentimes, at least having had one at my last board, sometimes you're monitoring for, I don't know a better word for it, but trolls. There's sometimes bots, there's sometimes trolls, there's,
I understand.
what you see more often is people wanting to complain there.
I see.
So you can't actually submit your complaint via Facebook,
Right.
but most people exactly what they try to do. So you're sending the same message. You have to go here, please go to our website. It has its moments, but it did seem to be not the most effective. Especially considering the resources of checking it every day, monitoring it, responding.
Right.
That's kind of the lack of maybe having a training and sort of like publications and media training on like how best to utilize a social media as a board. That could be also part of it.
Yeah, I know there's a way where you can have like an organization page, but you're just giving out information, but people aren't responding. People cannot respond back. So there is a way, and yeah, because I know people with pages like that where you can't respond back.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think, can I add something? I think when we look at communication, we should look at it strategically, and that's something that Charisse and I have talked about as far as our board, our resources, what we want to focus on, I do think that whatever communication methods are out there are valuable. I know that, Sharice has mentioned some of these. Outreach is a big one. We're still out there, going out there and talking to people and using those resources to get the word out. I know some board members here have been part of organizations in the past that I put information out there. They've helped me get it out there to some of the different avenues that they have. But I do think that when we look at this, we should look at it as a whole, our communication strategy as a board, the resources that we have. I think that, as I mentioned yesterday, we're getting to the point with our fiscal situation where we can now start asking for resources, and that's been a work in progress. I do think as we grow as a board, we'll be able to look at that. Can we have a staff person that is responsible for these types of communications? In the meantime, one of the big ones is collecting email addresses. That's something that we're going to get, hopefully. I think it's actually something that's already in our sunset bill, and that will be huge. That will help us.
I have a comment. I had asked for this to be on the agenda. It was top of my mind also because it was part of the sunset review discussions, but also because we had a public member from CASHA bring it up in our last meeting. And I think you provide an excellent summary of what you're doing, what the board's doing right now. What I'm wondering about, if this hasn't been done already, is providing the summary that you just gave, basically, to CASHA to help answer some of those questions that maybe they could put in their magazine or one of their news highlights or something like that, so they really can understand what the options are right now that you're already employing.
Yeah, I think we could draft a short article on how to keep in touch with the board, and to make sure you're getting the information you need, and kind of just article-like summary, and then we can provide it for all of them, HHP, CAA, and CASHA.
I think that would be really helpful.
However you guys want to use it. Yeah. That's always a helpful option. And then, of course, I don't think I mentioned it, but we also do put out a legislative advisory. So we do put out advisories about regulations and legislation. So anytime anyone has any questions on those, you can always go to our laws and regs page. They're also there. We also send those out via the listservs to the Legislation and Regulations Changes group. So there's a few different things. I think some are very in the know and some probably don't know. It's definitely on the website, but maybe not like front of mind, so.
I know we're probably straddling between, because when you say some people don't even use emails, I'm like, who doesn't use email? But we're straddling between right now an older generation versus a new set of generation that uses the phone, email, social media. And I can totally understand. They probably don't even go onto websites. Some people get emailed so much that it just gets into their junk email boxes. So it's going to be tough. Yeah. One suggestion, which if you guys are going out into, and passing out flyers, on the flyer, put like a QR code, and then they could just scan it, and then it goes directly to the website instead of them punching in, www.speechandhearing.ca.gov. It's easier for them to just scan it, and then they can see that they could put in their email address to get information. Yeah, because everybody just does their work on the phone, but sometimes punching in that website can be, they misspell something or whatnot. So a lot of people just use QR codes now.
And I could work with our IT to see if they can create us a QR code that we can always slap on things for different purposes.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, and I don't think I've heard of it at any leadership meeting, we haven't looked at any of the newer text type platforms where like sign up and get text alerts or whatever. I don't think DCA-wide has looked at that. So our listservs run off of a DCA-wide listserv mechanism. So yeah, we're only at that stage still. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's some rules in regards to like the text text messages, but definitely if you just do a simple QR code, and then when, you know, you go to like Cal State San Jose and you're talking to these students, they definitely are more susceptible to these QR codes and telling them to go and
Look at the website.
look at the website. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. In the past, professional organizations in the state could purchase address lists and make labels and, you know, send out their own correspondence. Will that be true if we're allowed to collect email addresses? Will those be sellable?
The emails will not, so it is only for the purposes of the board. So any association right now can currently ask for your address of record, and we can provide them a publicly available list because addresses of record are public. But that is limited to just the address. It is not the phone number. It is not an email if we have one. So I don't think at least I don't know of any board where they collect the email and it's not strictly for the purposes of the board. It's almost kind of the measure of making you more comfortable with providing it, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any other board discussion on this topic?
Well, thank you for all your input. So as we grow and we get to do more, I look forward to even more, but I appreciate the suggestions for now.
Nice to have youngsters on the board. I'd like to,
I just learned about the QR code like a couple months ago.
You make me feel better then, Karen.
Yeah, I started going to restaurants, and I'm like, what do you mean there's no menu?
I know.
Right?
Ah,
We've
yeah.
all learned that during.
Yeah.
I do this with my phone, okay. So I'd like to open it up for public comment from WebEx.
We are now open for public comment on this matter. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment.
Brianna, did you have a comment?
Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes.
There is no one present with me for public comment.
Thank you. I think we have public comment here in the,
Hi, Brianna Miller with Department of Consumer Affairs. Just want to add to the conversation very quickly that DCA does have a fantastic communications division, and I don't want to speak on their behalf and overpromise, but they do have the ability to offer communication plans, social media assistance, things that I know that they'd be more than happy to work with your board with to help with any communication needs that you're looking for. So just want to add that to the discussion. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Okay, obviously it isn't time to break for lunch just yet, so we're going to move on to agenda item number 11, update and discussion on boards filing a public comment regarding U.S. Food and Drug Administration proposed rule on medical devices, ear, nose, and throat devices, establishing over-the-counter hearing aids. And I think Paul is going to talk to us about that.
Yes, as you know, as part of the U.S. Food, Drug Administration Reauthorization Act of 2017, over-the-counter hearing aid category was established and required the FDA to promulgate regulatory requirements that will apply to them. At our January 13th meeting, we discussed these regulations and came up with concepts for the comments that we would provide. During that meeting, the board delegated to me and to Dr. Rajo the responsibility of combining and submitting these comments to submit them to the FDA for public comment. We submitted these comments on January 18th. They were publicly posted on the FDA website on January 20th. A copy of these comments were provided at our last meeting, and we just wanted to update you that to date we have not heard back from the FDA on these comments. I think we somehow we've at times discussed what the process is, and I'm not sure if Sharice, you have any more on the process and what their requirement is to respond to our comments.
I believe because we had a substantive comment, they have to recognize it, but I don't know beyond that. I don't think we've gotten any contact whatsoever just yet, but I expect to at least hear something. As far as I can tell from reading the requirements for them, it's not as open and public as ours is, where you have to have a meeting and talk about the comments and then your response to it and so on and so forth. It doesn't seem as back and forth and open as ours, so.
That's my understanding, that they have to acknowledge the receipt of it, but they don't have to respond at all, at least publicly.
This is Michael Canos, just checking in. The federal, I haven't checked on these specifically, but the federal regulatory process can take some time. And they will ultimately respond to the comments in the Federal Register. But I'm guessing they're still in that period of going through their responses and composing those.
Do they have to respond to each and every comment from every entity?
I believe they do, yes.
So we'll just continue to keep an eye on it, and of course, if we get contacted or if it's put into the register, we'll let you know what the result is. And of course, we'll absolutely be providing input once they finalize the regulation. So at this point, we've been putting it on the agenda in hopes it would be somewhat sooner, but knowing federal processes, maybe we don't need to put it on every agenda. We just wanted to make sure it was there in case we got a response back, so.
Okay. So any public comment here in the room? Can we open up for public comment from WebEx?
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 11. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment here, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
There is no one present with me for public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move to agenda item 12, which is quite an involved aspect of our board meeting. I know that we had a number of aspects that were handed out this morning that are going to cover these. So I'd like to turn it over to Maria Lorenzo to help us navigate this.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. Today I will be presenting updates on regulation package, and then we'll present 4 languages for vote. The first item on the report is the SLIPA requirements. Currently, it's in the regulatory document preparation stage. We have identified some changes that need board approval before continuing with finishing the documents for the initial review process. The next item is uniform standards. That's regulatory language was adopted on August 13th, 2021. On March 24th, 2022, board staff submitted the required documents to DCA Legal for pre-review process. And once that's complete, we'll begin the initial department review.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? My agenda shows that we're supposed to discuss these one at a time and make some decisions about them. Are we going to cover them all first and then go back to that?
Apologies, I was going to let her do the quick overview, and then we'll go through the ones that need
All right.
votes.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. The next item is the RPE supervision requirements and telesupervision. On August 24th, board staff submitted the completed regulatory proposal to DCA to start the initial department review. The proposals was resubmitted on August 5th, but it is still in the initial process, and once DCA is complete with their review, it will head to the Business, Consumer Service, and Housing Agency for review. The next item is the examinations requirements for hearing aid dispensers as dispensing audiologists. This is in the regulatory proposal, is in the regulations development phase, and it will be, and it requires review and approval by the board. And so we'll go over that once we're done here. The next item is our regulations on board location and processing time. This is a Section 100 regulations. So it's currently at the Office of Administrative Law. We do have some, we did meet with Office of Administrative Law, and so we'll provide you, Heather Olivares will provide you more information on the status of that one. Then we have the continuing professional development requirements for speech-language pathologists and audiologists. This is in the regulations development phase, and it's going to be presented for board review and vote. And then, let's see, notice to consumers was approved by the board on February 25th, 2022. The packet was submitted for pre-review to DCA Legal on March 24, 2022. Once the pre-review process is complete, it will begin the initial departmental review. And lastly, we have the fingerprint requirements, which is in the regulations development phase, and will be, the text will be presented for review and approval today.
Okay, this is Heather Olivares, Legislation and Regulation Analyst, and going back to item E, the board location and processing times. We submitted that to the Office of Administrative Law on April 8th, and they have 30 working days to either approve or deny it. And in this past week, I've been working with OAL. They had some concerns with our language regarding the processing times. Due to some technical issues, it does not qualify as a Section 100 change because a Section 100 change is an abbreviated process. Even though we discussed it here at the board, it doesn't go through a formal public comment process. And because our authority that we use to put those regulations in place still exists, we cannot just eliminate it without also going through the formal regulatory process. So we had to withdraw those sections of our regulatory proposal. So the changes that are moving forward now is just the board location, changing that since it is in regulation. And then there's a minor change to make a section gender neutral. So those will likely be approved by the Office of Administrative Law next week, and that will go into effect following their approval. But for changing the processing times, we will need to bring that back as a separate proposal if we decide to move forward with that and go through the formal rulemaking process. Any questions about that?
So just to provide extra clarity for what Heather was talking about, the board had made some non-substantive changes to that regulation section that added some additional statutory authority back in 2015, and that's why it doesn't qualify anymore. It didn't just say that statute that required us to promulgate the regs. It had other statutes that authorized it. So because those still exist and not the initial law that required all boards to develop processing timeframes, that's why. So.
Okay, so at this point, do we want to go back? There are a couple of them that are going to require, actually several are going to require us to accept the changes that you're saying. Do you want to start back on item A? That seems to be one, 12A.
Item 12A is the SLIPA requirements. And so we're bringing this back to the board due to some clarity issues that were discovered in preparing the document for the regulatory process. Because some of the sections that were the issues and concerns that were raised were mostly related to the academic and educational requirements to the SLIPA. We believe that we should omit that and move forward with what we have, which is allowing telesupervision and the initial licensure 20% within the 90 days requirements to still continue the regulatory process. And so that's what we're presenting today. I can go over each changes that were made section by section.
That would be appreciated.
All right, so section 1399.170. The only change that was made here was to the last item, we move for the division. It was referencing that this term can be used for the division. That was removed by legal, with legal's recommendation. For the next one, 1399.170.2. We have made changes to subdivision D. In particular, we remove, there was a reference to the leading supervisor will be responsible to ensuring that the SLIPA meets this requirement, which is the 20% per week during the first 90 days. Due to the lack of clarity, and instead we have provided more clarity of how to document it and where the documentation should be kept. So it will now say the supervisor shall maintain a record in the speech-language pathology assistance personnel file that verifies that the speech-language pathology assistant meets the requirement in this subdivision. So that was the major change we did here, just for the purpose of clarity so that the supervisor knows how to stay in compliance or for compliance purpose. Are there any questions with that changes?
So you're saying that the amount of supervision isn't changing, it's only that there's some record keeping that you're adding?
Yeah, so yeah, how to show compliance in a way, as well as alleviating the additional work that a lead supervisor is going to be required to do. Essentially because every supervisor has to make sure that they have to meet the requirements. So that way, in the event we need to have evidence for an investigation, we can refer to the personnel file.
So if you were to audit this person or something, they would have these records in that circumstance?
Yeah.
Mostly, okay.
I have a question too. I'm just wondering about the 90 days of work following initial licensure, which makes sense to me. I know we discussed that. So was that also a point of clarification, adding initial, or was that already there?
That was already there.
It was already there,
Yeah,
okay.
that was already there. Yeah,
Okay.
we didn't make any changes to the board-approved language in the first part.
Okay,
It was just the second provision.
All right, thank you.
Then we removed the following items, which were regarding, they're in the board memo. It's section 1399.170.4, .5, .10, and .11. And those sections are regarding the SLIPA program requirements for the directors. It includes also changes that the board wanted to make with the bachelor's program and field hours. There was a bit of clarity issue about the board-approved bachelor program for SLIPAs that we need to work with legal to make sure it's clear.
I'm sure, it's not, I can't.
It's not here, it's because it's being removed. It'll be a different package in the future.
Rhea, can I add just a point of emphasis here? On this particular package, the goal is to move this package forward, and those other issues, we can still address them as a board. I've had this experience where sometimes, you try to do a lot in one rulemaking file, and sometimes it's easy to parse it out. Let's get these major changes done, and then we can come back and visit those other changes. So I think staff made a really good suggestion here on omitting some of this language so that we can move this forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
So not that we won't address it, it just will be addressed in its own separate regulatory package.
Section 1399.170.15, we also made the changes to items subdivision B4 regarding the 20% per week first 90 days, so that it matches with what the changes we've just made. We also made changes to subdivision C regarding the 30 business day. It was missing the point of reference, which is from the start of supervision. And yes, that was the changes in that section. Are there any questions? Everything else was already approved. Then section 1399.170.16 remained the same. We kept it as is, as what was previously approved. Section 1399.170.17, we had removed the, this one had the reference of the lead supervisor being responsible of the 20% in the first 90 days. We removed that so that it was consistent with the changes we made earlier. And then we have the application. We just updated the application so that it aligns with the new changes we made to the supervision requirements. In the beginning, we put more information of the requirements, the law, regulations, code section that requires this form to be completed, as well as updating the duties and responsibility of the supervisor to make sure it aligns with what's in the regulations. Are there any questions with the changes that were made to this regulations?
I'm going to defer to the speech pathologist on the...
I have no questions or comments. Thank you.
Oh, this is Gilda. Very well written. I have no questions or additional comments. Thank you.
Any further board discussion? Audience discussion? Questions? Can we open it up for public comment via WebEx?
We are now open for public comment on this via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
I think she already responded, but we do need to look at the action requested for this one before we go further, I would say. So there is a move to, there's language for a motion on page 2 of 2 for 12A. Somebody, can we read that in its entirety as a motion?
You got it. I will read it for you.
Would you? Thank you.
So the suggested motion is to move to approve the proposed regulatory text from sections 1399.170, 1399.170.2, and 1399.170.15 through 1399.170.18. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the Executive Officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the Executive Officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations to sections 1399.170, 1399.170.2, and 1399.170.15 through 1399.170.18 as noticed.
Okay, can I have a board member?
So moved. To make a motion? So moved.
Sorry, I second the motion.
Okay, now we're going to go back to any public comment, either from people here in the room. And if there's no comment here or further from the board, I'd like to open it up for WebEx comment again.
We are now taking public comment on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will take comments in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
There is no one present with me for public comment.
Thank you. So, Sharice, would you like to call the vote if there's no further board discussion?
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser? Aye. Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang? Aye. Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Ms. Snow? Aye. Dr. White? Aye. Motion carries.
Okay, so according to my notes, we're going to be looking at 12D as the next one that requires further discussion.
Yes, this is the examination requirements for hearing aid dispensers and dispensing audiologists. It's a combination of two previously board-approved language that we are looking to prepare documents for the regulatory process. It will align regulations with current examination process, as well as streamline the licensure for dispensing audiologists. In 2018, DCA presented to the board that after conducting occupational analysis on the audiologist practice, they recommended that the dispensing audiologists, the dispensing audiologists should not have to take the practical examinations due to their extensive clinical and professional training. And so the board adopted language to specify in regulations that the examinations required to become a dispensing audiologist would only be the written exam. With that, we made changes to the hearing aid regulations regarding the examination process to include a section for practical examination, a section for written examination, and it will also include information on the application needed and as well as filing period. The Hearing Aid Dispenser Committee did review these language and There was no substantive changes since then. So today we're presenting this for board review and approval.
Is there any board discussion or questions about this? Seeing none, I see we again have motion language that Sharice might read for us, as she did before. It's page 3 of 3 for 12D.
Apologies, I am coming to that.
Sorry,
No worries.
On spot.
Lots of flipping over here. So the suggested motion is to move to approve the proposed regulatory text for sections 1399.120, 1399.121, 1399.122, and 1399.152.4. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the Executive Officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the Executive Officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations at section 1399.120, 1399.121, 1399.122, and 1399.152.4 as noticed.
So move.
Second.
We have motion and a second. I'd like to open up for a public comment here in the room, if there's any. Seeing none, I'd like to open it up for public comment via WebEx.
We are now taking public comment on the motion via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment via WebEx, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
There is no one present with me for public comment.
Okay, thank you. Sharice, would you like to call the vote?
Yes. Dr. Raggio.
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser. Aye. Mr. Borges.
Aye.
Ms. Chang. Aye. Ms. Dominguez.
Aye.
Ms. Snow. Aye. Dr. White. Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like our next item to discuss is 12F. We do have an extra hand carry item for that.
This item is the continuing professional development requirements for speech-language pathologists and audiologists. The board has been reviewing the CPD requirements to allow for half of the requirements to be accrued through self-study courses. In preparing the language for the board's approval, board staff has identified some additional provisions that will make current the CPD requirements regulations. So I can go through each of the section to explain what's being added.
That might be helpful.
New provisions being added are found in the second section, 1399.160.1. There was no changes in the first one. So we'll jump into that. That starts on page 2. And so here we're just increasing clarity of the licensure type, by inserting the license type information, as well as adding 2 provisions for license type that aren't in this section, in particular dispensing audiologist and dual speech language pathology dispensing audiology license. Essentially, this section has the certifying statement that is on the renewal form that says that you certify your, confirming that you completed your CPD hours. And those were the 2 items that were missing, the license type.
I'm just curious if the board knows, or the board staff knows, how many people hold dual licensure anymore?
I have not run that statistic recently, actually.
Just curious if you happen to come across it sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I think it must be a rare breed anymore.
Yeah. I'll have to look it up so we actually know. I haven't looked at it in quite some time, so.
Thank you, sorry to interrupt.
No.
The next change was in 1399.160.2, and we are adding a new provision at the end, subdivision C, which is that the request for exemption is only valid for 1 year. And that is actually a current process. It's not, it's just codifying what we're already doing.
And to clarify, that's 1 renewal period.
In section 1399.160.3, there are a couple of additions, provisions that we're missing that are currently something that the board does, but just wasn't in regulations. So in subdivision A, we're inserting the provision regarding related or indirect courses, the limitations that only 2 hours can be collected from this type of course content. It's something that's already a requirement. It just wasn't in regulations. We're doing that as well as for subdivision B. Because of that change, we are, it does create consistency issues of the number of hours. So it did affect the number of hours. We calculate it to be 1/3 of self-study for that portion of the course of indirect and related courses limitations. So we went over to make sure that the other sections in regulations were aligned to that number. So it did affect subdivision E2 and F2B, that it increased it by half a point.
Mind explaining?
Yeah, I could.
One more time.
Yeah, so currently when I was looking at, so I do a lot of cross-references, and so when I was looking at, especially if we're adding new provisions, we have to explain it, so it does create a consistency issue when the Office of Administrative Law is looking at it and it doesn't match with other provisions when we're saying, you know, it's consistent with what we're doing, but it's a little off. So essentially, from my understanding is that self-study is going to be half of the CPD hours. Of that number, For what's already in regulations, a third of that could only be acquired for courses related or indirect client care, is how I calculate it. So again, it's just making it proportionally consistent for all the exemptions as we're adding things to regulations, new provisions into regulations. A new item that was added was the last two items regarding cross-reference to CPD requirements for supervisors. Just making it clear to licensees that if you're a supervisor, please reference the either RPE or SLPA sections for those requirements.
I believe, Maria, you want to go over E3 as well, regarding equipment, devices, and other products.
Oh, yes. So there is one item for discussion. Thank you, Charisse. As I was preparing the documents and knowing what's happening in other areas, I have noticed that the language in this regulations does reference products courses for hearing aid dispensers. So the board may wish to look at it and see about revising it. So that's going to be on page page 5 of the text, number 3, subdivision C3. And it currently says that not more than 50% of continuing professional development hours required of a licensed may be in hearing aid courses and shall not be obtained from courses where the content focuses on equipment, devices, or products of a particular manufacturer or company.
So it's referenced twice.
Yes, it's referenced also in page 6, and that's due to the different licensing type. One is specifically for the audiologist, and then the other one's for dispensing audiologists. But they essentially have the same language, and so we wanted to get a bit more guidance of how we should move forward before actually having a final vote on this item.
So staff did consider potentially just cross-referencing, but I think you might remember, or if you're looking at tab HAD3, there's multiple provisions in the what hearing aid dispensing courses cannot include that may not apply to an audiologist. So we wanted to just clarify, we were talking about the product one, so we may want to go ahead and look at adding the same language that the Hearing Aid Dispensing Committee is looking at, which was, shall not be obtained from courses where the content is focused on marketing, launching, or demonstrating the marketability of equipment, devices, or other products, regardless of whether it focuses on a particular manufacturer's or company's equipment, devices, or products. This shall include the distribution of any materials during or after the course. And so it might be particularly relevant that anytime we're looking at it hearing aid dispensers-wise, we come back and look at this as well. But there's always time later on if things change during the public comment periods to do an additional 15 days if we need to conform the language.
Okay, so we don't have to make that change in here today.
I would suggest making that change now if the board is comfortable with just that language that we talked about yesterday, and then making revisions as we go.
Well, it seems like consistency to add that here today if we can. It's expedient to do it.
So,
I don't know what the process is exactly for doing that here.
if you're okay with my suggested amendment, I think we can read the motion and add as amended.
Okay.
Sharice, can I just clarify something? Were there some areas that were left open that still needed to be discussed as far as the hearing aid dispenser CE language?
I think there is on whether or not there should be a restriction on the number of hours done with product, and then I think there could be some clarity that we might want to add to that. It might be a question more of, is that language clear enough, or is there some other language that might be clearer to the stakeholders about what exactly is prohibited?
I thought we were also going to check on the post-marketing issue.
I think that's the second sentence about distribution of materials during or after the meeting, that the prohibition on that course content includes the materials.
But we were going to check on whether there were any issues with trying to put those limitations as far as post-marketing, post-course marketing, right?
I'm trying to remember. Or was that about the
That's something that we asked you, Michael, to look at.
I think briefly we had a discussion on whether that might be commercial speech and that's something that we can look at.
Okay.
But
would you like to hold off on that then and make the change later, but keep a kind of a flag on this, that whatever we end up in the last final version needs to reflect what the hearing aid dispensing committee does?
I would leave that up to the board to decide.
It's, in one sense, it seems a little cleaner to hold off on it until we have incorporated everything, all these changes, and bring it back. On the other hand, it's here in front of us. If it's possible to look at those things later, still approve everything else.
I'm going to suggest that the regulatory process is iterative and takes some time, so understandably, there will be more times and more public opportunities, because of course, even once we get to the Office of Administrative Law and notice it, it goes out for a 45-day public comment period, at which point the board will take those public comments, can make substantive changes, and go out for another public comment period. So there is always that future opportunity to change the language as well as get it out to the public. So there is that opportunity.
So
we could wait.
If I understand you right, then we would go ahead with accepting the motion for these current changes.
And leave that out for a later point, if you would like, if that's the purview of the board, yeah.
Other thoughts about that?
I think that makes it cleaner and easier, yeah. I mean, I don't think we want to stop the whole process just for that one thing.
And it's occurred to me that I should be deferring to Ms. Halbo on this because these are potential legal issue with the regulation, and I don't know if she has any thoughts on.
Between yesterday and today, we did not resolve the question of commercial speech for sending something after. So that is something we're not sure of just now. But I do agree and sadly confirm that it is a very iterative process. And if you can move forward in any way with what you have and that you're comfortable with, I would urge moving forward.
And do I recall we added the language yesterday to the other regulation?
Yeah, I think so.
It was added verbally, yes.
Yeah, so then if you took the amendment as proposed, then those two packages would have parallel language, and we will research those issues, and if there needs to be a change, it will come back to the Hearing Aid Dispensers Board and this board.
But if you like, we can move ahead cleanly and address that later. Again, there is multiple options, so very iterative.
So it seems like if the board agreed on the language yesterday, then we probably may want to do it here, because the same way it's iterative by not adding it, it's iterative by adding it. So we may want to just add it. I just want to make sure there were no resolved issues, but it sounds like we agree in concept of that language.
Can I get clarification real quick? So for what we're talking about right now, the three, we're talking about this highlighted portion about the equipment, devices, and of another particular manufacturer company, and we're also talking about what we spoke about yesterday in the hearing aid dispensing committee, right? About I think it's 1399.140.1, A1. And did we do an amendment or like a change of wording on that one?
We added to B2, so on the
okay.
prohibitive side. So B2, the language that was in the document was course content focused on marketing, launching, or demonstrating the marketability of equipment, devices, or other products, regardless of whether it focuses on a particular manufacturer's or company's equipment, devices, or products. And then per the conversation about marketing materials being distributed at meetings or at continuing education courses, we added, this shall include the distribution of any materials during or after the course. And so the part that is still under question would be the after the course.
Oh, okay.
As compared to what we can say can count during the course. But that is in the parts about examples of courses that are considered outside of the scope of acceptable course content. So we would be prohibiting the marketing side, and we would like that to include materials.
Okay.
And that was the verbally added part.
Can we do something similar to what we did with HAD with this one? Is that what we're trying to figure out right now, right?
That way it's clear to
That's
dispensing audiologists that this
yeah.
applies to them
Then
too.
too,
Yes.
right? Would that make the process longer? Make our process longer?
That is always the hesitation I have, is to make our process longer. We do want this package to move. But knowing that our legal team works really hard to help us with this iterative process, and they're going to look into this issue rather quickly.
Okay.
By the time, I would point you to that memo for 12 that has all those little boxes that go along. We're still quite a ways from the OAL box.
I saw that
So the potential could be that we resolve the question before we get to the August meeting, and if we need to make additional changes, we might not have gotten all the way through agency's approval to go to notice with the Office of Administrative Law. And in my perfect world of optimism, all of those trains would align and allow us to carry on. And that's the way I'm hoping to operate. So that was potentially the question of, should we go ahead and add the language now, if that's what we agreed on yesterday and the board is okay with that? And then if there are changes, of course, we would have to make a quick adoption in August of that amended language if we have to remove after the course.
And I would opine, we are saying that they can't send marketing materials to these enrolled people afterwards on the basis of them being on that list. But it's not saying that they can't they don't have to double check their other lists. Oh, was this person it's just, I can't use this list and mail to all of them. So there is a possibility it's restricting commercial speech, but it also is saying if you wish to present a course, you're just not going to use this email list to send or written list to send things. So I don't see it as a big problem, and I need to look further to understand, is it possibly a big problem? But the issue is, are we restricting their commercial speech? And we're not saying you can't do this ever. We're saying if you want to offer this class, don't use this list to mail things right afterwards.
It makes me feel better.
Would it make a difference if you added the word immediately in there, immediately after the course?
I think it might be.
As a way to narrow down the scope of when we're saying they can't send them promotional material relative to the course. Because I mean, we get promotional material all the time, you know, it's just what they send out. We get phone calls and all that all the time. So we can't really say you can't send them stuff ever.
My guess is it might need to be clarified based on their attendance in the course, so that it's clear that it's part of the course. Because of course, these companies can still offer this course all they want, but people in California would not be able to get credit. So they could still go out there with that speech, and you could still take that course, you just can't count it as a approved course for board purposes and part of your renewal. So it sounds like from what Karen's saying, we'll look into the issue deeper, but it may need clarification that their attendance at the course means you can't use their attendance and any information you garnered there to then market to them. But if you already are on their listserv, you're still going to get it because you're already on their listserv. It's just that you can't just say like, oh, sign up for this CE course. Oh, look at my new roster of people I can market to. Like, X-nay on that list. But, you know, if you sign up for updates, then you sign up for updates, so.
Okay, so the suggestion is that we add that particular language about the after, and other language to this, further amend this motion.
That's kind of my suggestion, and then if we need to amend it, we would amend it in August. And hopefully that would coincide with us getting approval and along our way to noticing it at the Office of Administrative Law.
Nice to have these kind of avenues of correction if needed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so again, looking at page 3 of 3, there is a suggested motion. This is F. Okay.
Would you like me to read it as amended?
Right. Making sure I'm covered all my bases here. Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, so the suggested motion is to move to approve the proposed regulatory text as amended for sections 1399.160 through 1399.160.4. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations at sections 1399.160 through 1399.160.4 as noticed, as amended.
So you're putting the as amended, okay.
Yes, as amended. So moved? Oh, yeah, so moved.
I second.
Okay. Is there any comment from the audience here in the room? Seeing none, I'd like to ask our WebEx to open for public comment.
We are now open for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. If you are a dial-in user, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a moment now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
No one is present with me for public comment.
Thank you. If there's no other board comment, I'd like to ask Therese to call the vote.
Dr. Raju?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser? Aye. Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang? Aye. Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Ms. Snow? Aye. Dr. White? Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. Being mindful of our time certain for our 11 o'clock people, it's 20 minutes to. Do you think that we can, it looks like item 12H is our next issue, that we can get through that in 20 minutes, or is that a?
Yeah, I think so. It's a previously board-approved language regarding fingerprinting requirements for renewals.
I just thought 20 minutes was too long, so.
So we're starting to prepare documents for this, and so we're bringing this back now that we have a regulations legal team to review the language. This is in response to media reports that surfaced that there was licensed individuals who didn't have fingerprint on file. So the board is passing regulations to require refingerprinting for those that were licensed before 1999, which was the introduction of LiveScan, the electronic fingerprinting. And so essentially, they're, for the most part, the same language that was the board had approved. There was just a reformatting to the section, so that's more clear of what provisions will be applicable to those that will be required to be refingerprinted. We also have, we increased the dollar amount for the traffic infraction from $500 to $1,000. And then we also added the section so that this information is applicable to SLPAs. The way our regulations is structured is that where you put certain items affects only certain license type. So that was missing from last time, the SLPAs, who are also required for renewal.
Is it still $80 to get your fingerprinted?
Yes, it's at least $50 for the background check, and then the additional service fee from the actual provider, LiveScan, company, usually are $10 to $20 service fee. Yeah. So.
Okay. Any board discussion on this item? Okay, looks like we again have motion language already on page 2 of 2 for 12H. Therese, if you would be so kind.
Absolutely. The suggested motion is move to approve the proposed regulatory text for sections 1399.112, 1399.151.2, and 1399.170.14. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations at sections 1399.112, 1399.151.2, and 1399.170.14 as noticed.
Somebody like to move that?
I so move.
Second.
Okay, I'd like to ask if there's any public comment here in the room. Seeing none, I'd like to open for public comment via WebEx.
We are open for public comment via WebEx on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
There is no one present with me for public comment.
If there isn't any further board discussion, I'd like to ask Therese to call the vote.
Dr. Raggio.
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser. Aye. Mr. Borges.
Aye.
Ms. Chang. Aye. Ms. Dominguez.
Aye.
Ms. Snow.
Aye.
Dr. White. Aye. Motion carries.
Yes. And thanks, Maria, this is yeoman's work, getting all of this done. We really appreciate it. And thanks for explaining everything so well. Since we do have a time certain at 11, sounds like a good time to take a break until then. So we'll meet back at 11. I'd like to move to item number 9, update and discussion on the Audiology and Speech-Language Pathology Interstate Compact. I would like to provide a short overview of this issue before we invite our guest speakers to join us. As some of you may know, the Audiology and Speech-Language Pathology Interstate Compact is a cooperative agreement enacted into law by participating states to facilitate the interstate practice of audiology and speech-language pathology while maintaining public protection. The original intent was that the compact was operational when they had 10 states that enacted the law, and there is a commission that then serves as an administrative body to manage the compact. Compact privilege refers to the authorization granted by a remote state to allow a licensee from another state to practice as an audiologist or a speech-language pathologist in a remote state under the state's laws and rules. The practice of audiology occurs in the member state where the patient, client, or student is located at the time of the patient-client-student encounter. The audiologist has a home state of license, which is the licensee's primary state of residence. So the idea is to facilitate interstate practice of these two professions. It is a contractual legislative enacted agreement between states, and apparently my understanding is that the ASLPIC Commission is scheduled to convene, or did convene in January of 22 to establish rules and bylaws. And my understanding also is that now we're up to 18 states that have joined the compact. So I'd like to invite our guest speaker today and introduce Matt Schaefer, who currently serves as the Deputy Director at the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. Excuse me. Matt manages interstate compact development for a number of different professions, including teaching, cosmetology, massage therapy, social work, and dentistry. He also works with state legislators and stakeholder groups to support the enactment of compacts for counseling, occupational therapy, and speech-language pathology. He has vast experience developing and building consensus on policy options for state legislators, and he holds a master's degree in public administration from the University of Kentucky. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Schaefer to our meeting and to give us more information about the Interstate Compact.
Great, thank you. Before I begin, just wanted to confirm that everyone can hear me okay?
I think so.
Okay, great. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm East Coast, so afternoon for me. Excited to be talking about the topic with you today. And like I said, my name is Matt Schaefer. I'm the Deputy Director in the National Center for Interstate Compacts at the Council of State Governments. Worked with a number of different professions, as was noted, on interstate compacts, and excited to be talking about the Audiology and Speech-Language Pathology Compact today. So if we could advance next slide. Great, and one more. All right, so before we get into the ASLP IC, I just wanted to provide a group an overview of the compact in general. So as noted, an interstate compact is a legal, legislatively enacted.
Excuse me, Matt. I think, is there anything we could do about the audio? It's kind of
Yes.
cutting out and skipping. Is there anything we do, Sharice, about that?
I think we would have to check if that's our web access here, the feed we're getting, or if that's everyone's getting a choppy audio.
This is the moderator.
Can
I
you
believe
confirm?
that it,
Sorry, David, go ahead.
I believe that Matt is having bandwidth issues. I see
Matt,
that
if you'd
Matt has
like
turned
to,
off
you
his
can
video.
also call in for your audio. That is an option with WebEx. That might be easier.
Okay. Let me pause and do that if the audio is not operating.
Before trying to call in, you might try just shutting off the video. That is a huge draw on the bandwidth.
Okay, how about that? Does that help?
It does seem a little better. Go ahead and try that.
Okay. All right, so an interstate compact is a legislatively enacted contract between two or more states. And so the emphasis that we love here is a contract. This is not just a change in administrative rules, but this is a legal agreement that brings
We
in.
may want to, excuse me, Matt, we may want to have you call in. It's still a little choppy.
Okay. All right. Well, let me pause and I'll call in.
Call-in user 3. If this is Matt, would you please raise your hand by dialing *3? You can unmute yourself by dialing *6.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, welcome back.
Okay, great. So an interstate compact, like I was saying, is a legal, legislatively enacted contract between two or more states. So the key things to emphasize here is that it's a legal contract. This is a binding contractual relationship that's formed between the two states. And another thing to note here is that it's legislatively enacted, which was noted before. This is not just a change in administrative regulations, but this is a piece of legislation that is adopted by all of the states who are agreeing to enter into this contractual relationship. And so you can see here a picture of the driver's license. That's a common example that we point to that normally resonates with people in terms of an example of an interstate compact. So rather than the federal government telling states how they should regulate drivers across state lines, the states came together and developed the driver's license compact, which allows for motor vehiclists to drive across state lines and only maintain one license rather than getting licensed in every state that they want to drive in. So that is an example of an interstate compact. So next slide, please. All right, so historically, there's been several uses of interstate compacts. These things have been around for a very long time, really since the founding of our country. Initially, they were used to resolve boundary disputes amongst the states. There's a lot of different compacts out there for managing shared natural resources that cross state lines. So rivers, forest, gorge, all of those things that might need to be managed by multiple states. There's usually an interstate compact to govern how that shared management is going to work. And then lastly, creating administrative agencies with jurisdiction over state concerns. This is where our focus today of occupational licensing compacts falls. Next slide, please. So really, there's a lot of misconceptions about these licensure compacts, but when you get down to it, all we're trying to do is facilitate a additional pathway for licensees who want to practice in multiple states. So we're not usurping the current structure that's in place, but we're just providing an additional pathway for practitioners who want to be mobile, who might want to practice in more than just their home state where they reside. We believe that they maintain or improve public health and safety. This is mainly due to the amount of information sharing that occurs by joining an interstate compact. So member boards have access to information on licensees that are utilizing the compact, things like investigative information, any past discipline history or adverse actions, license status, exam scores, training, experience, all of those things are uploaded into the data system, and state boards, regulators have access to all that information about licensees that are in their state. So we're really raising the bar in terms of regulation, the amount of information that states have access to. And then we believe that they preserve state authority over professional licensing. And this is an important thing to note, that the compact does not touch scope of practice. So in terms of what you call speech language pathology and audiology, the compact does not dictate scope of practice at all. The only thing that it does is lay a framework for how someone would practice in other compact member states. But once they're there, once they're practicing in the remote state, they have to abide by that state's laws and rules. So if there's something that they are not allowed to do in the remote state, they would be in violation of the Practice Act if they tried to engage in those activities, even if they were licensed in their home state to do so. So they have to abide by the scope of practice in whatever state in which they're practicing. Next slide. All right, so these compacts have been very popular in recent years, over the last 10 years or so, since the nursing compact came into existence. We've seen over 200 pieces of compact legislation passed, even since just 2016. And almost all states have adopted at least one of these compacts. And there's currently 9 professions that have these in place, and we can see the list on the next slide. All right, so nursing kind of leads the way. They were the first one to do this, and they have the highest number of member states. You can see here the ASLP compact currently with 19 states. The ones kind of on the right side are a little bit newer. ASLP, OT, counseling, the APRN compacts are all just within their first or second legislative cycle getting enacted out in the state. So the ones, nursing, medicine, PT, those have been around a little bit longer, which is why they have more member states. But normally it takes probably about 3 to 5 years to really get a significant number of states on board to these. Next slide, please. These are current compacts that are under development. So these are not out to states yet, but these are currently being drafted by the Council of State Governments and our partner organizations within these professions. So you can see just the list of professions that will soon have interstate compacts. Probably these will be ready for the 2023 legislative session. Next slide. All right, so just a little bit about how the ASLP IC was developed. Next slide, please. All right, so our CSG, we have kind of honed a process for developing interstate compacts that we've utilized really since CSG was founded in the 1930s. We've been helping states develop and pass interstate compacts. But specifically for the ASLP compact, so we convened in 2017 what we call the advisory group, which is a larger group of stakeholders that are representatives of the profession. So this would be licensees, regulators, legislators, all came together. There's about 25 folks in the group, and they all came together and developed a set of recommendations as to the provisions of the compact. Those recommendations were then handed off to the drafting team, which met throughout the latter half of 2018. So the drafting team actually put pen to paper on what the advisory group had recommended. And the drafting team was made up, again, members of the profession, but primarily folks who had experience with legislative drafting or were attorneys for regulatory boards. We convened in late 2018, early 2019, a stakeholder review process where we vetted the compact language with the profession and held regular meetings, collected feedback, and discussed potential edits with the drafting team. The drafting team then reconvened and reviewed all of that feedback and made necessary changes. And then the model legislation was ready to get passed in the states in March of 2019. So that's just a little bit about how we developed the compact. We pride ourselves in running a completely open and transparent process. We don't like to hide the ball on anything that's in the compact, and so that's why we hold public comment period. That's why we have stakeholder review, and we want to be really diligent to make sure that everyone's concerns are heard and everyone's perspective is heard in terms of the specific provisions of the compact. So it was very much thoroughly vetted with the profession. Next slide. All right, so phase 2 is when we move from the development process into legislative enactment. So you can see in our first year, we had 6 states on board and then 9 more states that joined in 2021. And really this phase continues until all 50 states are members of the compact. We'll always be educating and working to help states enact the compact until everybody is a member. On the next slide, you can see the list of states that have passed in 2022. and then the states where legislation has been introduced and either was not successful or is still pending. Next slide. All right, so after, like was mentioned previously, there is a threshold number of states that is specified in the model compact legislation. That number is 10. So once the 10th state passed the compact, that's when we transitioned into standing up the Interstate Commission, which is the administrative body that is made up of the member states that oversees the compact activities. So writes the rules and the bylaws, oversees the compact, and makes sure that it's achieving its mandate. So that commission met for the first time in January and drafted the initial set of bylaws and rules. And then we've had subsequent meetings with subcommittees of that commission, the executive committee, rules, and then there will be a special commission meeting in May to finalize the initial rules and bylaws that were drafted. Next slide. All right, so we talked about how the compact was developed. We've talked about compacts generally. Now I wanted to get into the specifics of the provisions in the ASLP compact. So this compact functions essentially the same as all of the other licensure compacts out there for professions like occupational therapy, physical therapy, nursing, medicine. These are all what we call mutual recognition compacts, where if you have a valid, unencumbered, active home state license, you are able to receive a compact privilege to practice in another member state. And the Audiology and Speech Compact authorizes this practice for both telehealth and in person across state lines. And like I just mentioned, it became operational when the 10th state passed. So again, all we're trying to do with this compact is facilitate a process for the speech therapist or the audiologist who wants to practice in multiple states to not have to go through the full licensure process. They can just purchase a practice privilege, and that gets them access to the remote state if they meet certain provisions that are in the compact, which we'll review shortly. Next slide. All right, so obviously the benefits to practitioners, the primary one, which we've mentioned several times, is increased mobility. You are now able to practice, in addition to your home state where you're licensed, you're now able to practice in other compact member states. So if there's 30 members of the compact, you could potentially buy privileges in all 30 of those states and have access to over half the country. It leverages advances in technology. I mentioned telepractice. Compacts provide for a structure for telepractice that allows the practitioner to maintain one license but have privileges in as many states as they would like to see patients. So if they could potentially have patients all over the country that they're seeing while maintaining just one license in their home state. And then lastly, supporting relocating families. This is particularly relevant for the Department of Defense. DoD families, military families move so often because of basing decisions, usually every 2 to 3 years. And so DoD has kind of gold stamped compacts as the best long-term solution for military spouses in order to facilitate portability of licensure. So there's a special provision in the ASLP compact that is related to military spouses that allows them to designate a home state for the duration of their active duty military service, and they're able to maintain that home state so they don't have to go through the licensure process whenever they move to a new state. Next slide, please. All right, benefits to licensing boards. So a huge benefit is securing agreement on uniform licensure requirements. So by joining the compact, you're essentially saying that another state's licensure requirements are good enough for their practitioners to come into your state and practice. There's an agreement there that however they did their initial licensure is good enough for you to allow them to practice and come into your state. And by joining a compact, it creates that relationship of reciprocity around licensure requirements. Creates a shared data system. I mentioned this towards the beginning of the presentation, but the backbone of all of these compacts is a shared data system that houses information about licensees, discipline information, licensure information, educational information. All of that is in the shared data system, and all of the compact member states have access to that information. They're able to make decisions about who practices in their state based on the information that's provided via the data system. And so it's just increasing the amount of information that regulators have to access. Enhances cooperation amongst state boards. So this relates to a requirement in the compact that states work together on joint investigations that cross state lines. So maybe currently you're just left up to the goodwill of your neighboring state in order to work with you on some sort of an investigation that might involve an out-of-state licensee. But through the compact, it's actually a requirement that member states work together on joint investigations. And so that's a really big benefit that regulators enjoy. And then lastly, just expanding the ability to protect public health and safety largely relates back to the point about the data system. There's just more information that regulators have access to, and they're able to make better public health and safety decisions. Next slide. All right, and states really like these compacts because it's more flexible than federal policy. A federal mandate that comes down that might be unworkable for states. This is states coming together to craft their own solution. So it's flexible, and states are working something for themselves rather than being told what's going to happen to them. Again, strengthen state sovereignty. The point about maintaining control over the Practice Act and the practice within that state. The compact does not dictate scope of practice at all. And then the last 2 points are similar. Just compacts are good for building healthy workforces, increasing access to highly qualified practitioners. You now, as a compact member state, would be able to recruit folks via the compact to practice in California and fill shortage areas. And so it strengthens labor markets in that way. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to cover a couple specifics about the state participation section in the compact. So this is a requirement of all member states that they have to currently require these things. So they have to require that audiologists have a doctoral degree. There's a provision for folks who have a master's degree before that date there, December 31st, 07. Complete a clinical practicum and passage of a national exam. For SLPs, there's a requirement for a master's degree, supervised clinical practicum, passage of a national exam, and a clinical fellowship. These requirements were designed to ensure that the maximum number of states possible were able to participate in the compact while also maintaining the prevailing licensure requirements in the states. And so these are the requirements in order to be able to join the compact. The licensees also have to hold an active and unencumbered license, and they can have never been convicted of a felony related to the practice. Then they have to have a valid social security number or NPI number, and then they have to agree to undergo an FBI fingerprint-based criminal background check. Next slide. All right, so just a little bit about how the compact privilege works. So I've mentioned this concept of a privilege. It works kind of like a hospital privilege would. You have your license that is in good standing in your home state, which is your primary state of residence, and you're able to apply via the compact for a privilege to practice in another remote state. And so you could choose to only purchase compact privileges in one remote state or two, or as many as you would like. It does not grant you access to all of the states that are members of the compact, but only states in which you wish to seek a compact privilege. And like I said, there's a provision for active duty military personnel where they can actually designate one home state where they have a license in good standing, and they can maintain that through the duration of their military service. So if they move, if they change their primary state of residence, that home state does not have to change. And again, the point about the data system, so the member states via the commission data system are able to communicate and exchange information about compact privilege holders. And so the benefits to issuing a privilege is that rather than having to go through the licensure process, rather than the licensee having to provide primary source verification documentation, all of that is done on the front end by the home state. And so practitioners are able to receive a compact privilege within a matter of days rather than having to wait weeks or months. So it's significantly faster than the current licensure process, and it's less costly. Next slide. All right, so the model compact legislation does specify that a practice privilege is equivalent to a license that's issued by the remote state. That is to say that the privilege can be acted upon by the remote state in the exact same way as if that person was licensed. So they can encumber the privilege, they could suspend the privilege, they could find the licensee that has the privilege, everything that you have access to as a regulator in order to protect public health and safety, all of those actions that you could potentially take against a license, you can do the same against a privilege. It's equivalent to a license in that way. States can charge a fee for a compact privilege, so they're able to claw back some of the revenue that could potentially be lost by no longer having as much out-of-state licensure application revenue. And then the privilege renews at the same time as the home state license. So if you're on a 2-year or 3-year renewal cycle, the privilege will renew at the same time as the licensee's home state license. And a big benefit of the compact is that the licensee only has to complete continuing education for the home state. So they don't have to do continuing ed in all of the other states in which they have a compact privilege, but only the home state where they actually hold the license. And again, it's important to emphasize that practitioners are required to abide by the scope of practice in which the state where they're holding the compact privilege. So if there's something that they are licensed to do in their home state, but the remote state does not allow them to perform this certain function, they have to be beholden to that remote state scope, and they can't do those things. Next slide. All right, a couple of specific things to note here about some particular practitioner types. So for school-based speech therapists, oftentimes a licensee who is working in a school might have to have a educator license in addition to their speech license. So the way it works is if you currently require SLPs who are working in a school to have an educator license in addition to their speech license, then folks accessing the compact would have to do that as well. So if you require that in California, if you want a privilege to practice in California, you would also have to obtain that Department of Ed license to be a licensed educator. If you don't currently require that, then all the person needs is the compact privilege, and they do not need to acquire that Department of Ed additional educator certification or license. Next slide. Same concept applies for hearing aid dispensing. So if you require an additional license to dispense hearing aids, then that person who is seeking a compact privilege in California would have to get that additional hearing aid dispensing license. So the practitioner would be able to get into the state via the compact privilege, but if they wanted to dispense hearing aids, they would have to get that additional license if that's something that California requires. If they don't, then all they would need to get is the compact privilege. Next slide. All right, like has been mentioned, the state maintains sovereignty over the Practice Act. So the licensee has to agree to abide by California's laws and rules if they're practicing there. And like I said previously, a state board can act against the privilege in the same way as if they would someone who is holding a license in California. The compact does not act against the practitioner, but it's the state board, the state regulators, who act against the compact privilege holder. So the compact cannot do anything to scope of practice. We're not dictating licensure requirements. The compact cannot take action against the licensee. All of that retained, all of that sovereignty is retained by the states, by the compact member states. And so the compact itself does not affect that in any way at all. Next slide. All right, and again, similar point here, but the data system that's in place allows member states to share information, ongoing investigative information, any adverse actions that are taken by a remote state, and all that information is uploaded into the data system, and all of the compact member states have access to it. So if there's someone who holds a compact privilege in Nevada and California, and maybe they violate the Practice Act in Nevada, California would be notified of that, and California would be able to make their own decision on whether or not they would like to revoke the compact privilege, depending on how egregious the offense is. The only time in which participants' privileges are revoked across the board is if the home state ever acts against the home state license. So all of this is contingent on the licensee maintaining an unencumbered home state license. So if their home state ever acts against the home state license, then all of the practice privileges are revoked until that encumbrance, that license is restored to good standing. But California retains the right to act against a privilege, and they can do so based on information provided by another remote state. So the violation doesn't necessarily need to occur in California in order for California to have the jurisdiction to take action. Next slide. All right, last thing that I wanted to note here is about compact governance. So one more slide, please. All right, so I've mentioned the Compact Commission. This is something where there's a lot of kind of misconceptions about what this is. All the Compact Commission is an instrumentality of the member states. So all of the members of the ASLP Commission are folks in the member states. So every state who is a member gets to elect 2 people to sit on the commission, one representing audiology and the other representing speech-language pathology. And so this commission is the one that administrates, oversees the daily operations of the compact. So they ensure that the data system is working properly, that boards are sharing information with one another, that information is shared, and it's an instrumentality of the member states, so that the commission is not dictating anything to the profession around scope of practice or licensure requirements, but all the commission is mandated to do is just effectuate the provisions of the compact. And this is considered a government entity. This is we say it's a suprastate sub-federal government entity where it's greater than any one state because it's a collection of states. So it's an instrumentality of all of the member states that have passed the compact. And so if California was to join, they would be able to elect 2 commissioners, one representing audiology and the other representing speech. And those could be licensing board administrators, board members, or public members of the board.
Next slide. All right, so that concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, apologies about the technical difficulties. I'm not sure what was going on there, but hopefully we still have the ability to have some question and answer time. So thank you all.
I know I have a few questions. Does anybody else have questions?
I have one or two. Go ahead.
I have a whole bunch. Go ahead.
Can I make a clarifying, would you like me to keep the slides up for now in case there's questions related to the slides? Okay.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
The first question I had is you mentioned earlier on about buying privileges. What does that exactly mean? Are they paying per state that they want reciprocity in?
Yes, so as the licensee, the applicant, you would be applying for a compact privilege, and you would pay a fee to every state in which you would want a compact privilege in. So if you, the state has the ability to set that fee, so California would be able to set that at whatever they wanted. I know for the physical therapy compact, they recommend that states try to reduce the cost as much as possible. I think they encourage their member states to charge $45 for the compact privilege. So it is a pretty nominal fee, and it just goes to the state to help them recoup some revenue.
Are there any fees that go to the compact itself?
Yes, so there's a fee to the compact commission that helps its operations, and then there's a fee to the member state. So again, the example of PT, they've set their fee to the commission at $45, and then they encourage the member states to also charge $45. So the cost to the practitioner would be $90 total, $45 to the commission, and $45 to the state. But again, the state could set that at whatever they wanted to.
Thank you.
Are there additional costs for the state to belong to the compact?
No, there's not. There's some compacts that can charge, assess states for membership. So the nursing compact assesses all of the member states $6,000 a year for being members of the compact. And then PsyPact, the psychology compact, charges, it's a sliding scale, so it's $100 per compact privilege. So if you're a state that has more users of the compact, you would have to pay a little bit more. But those are the only two compacts that are currently charging their member states anything to maintain their membership.
If you could go back to the slide that looked at qualifications, it's way back there, I think. Had some questions about that.
Yeah, I think we skipped over it. It's right there, right there.
Okay, so it says audiologists have to hold a doctoral degree. Are you referring to a clinical doctoral degree, an AUD, or a PhD? It could be either.
That's a great question. I'd have to go back and look at the model legislation to be sure. I think it is a clinical doctorate though, but I would have to confirm that.
Okay, so if you had a PhD in audiology or hearing science, you couldn't participate?
Again, I can't say definitively. I'd need to go back and confirm.
It also says supervised clinical practicum. I'm not exactly sure what that means. It's a broad term. Do you mean the final third or fourth year experience that AUD students currently have to participate in, or earlier rotations? How do you define that?
Yeah, again, I'd have to go back and be sure to answer those questions. Yeah, apologies.
It's the same issue for speech pathology. It's undefined what that means.
That would be important.
I wanted to understand something that you said that individual states can communicate with each other to check for licensure, I guess, for a given practitioner. How do they don't contact the commission to do this. They have to actually contact the state, some entity in that state, to check on a particular licensee? Did I understand you right?
Yeah, so it's all done via the compact data system, which is housed by the commission. So if you wanted to check out someone who was applying for a compact privilege in California, you would log into the data system and you'd be able to see where their home state license is. You'd be able to see, their exam scores and transcripts and any other information that was uploaded into the data system, their discipline history, any ongoing pending investigations regarding that individual. And then if you wanted to communicate with that home state about that particular licensee, you could do that via the data system, or you could always just reach out to them directly.
So it looks as though this only applies to audiologists and speech pathologists. So can hearing aid dispensers enjoy this privilege across states as well, or is that not part of your purview?
It's not. It's intended to be for licensed audiologists and speech language pathologists.
Yes, I'm wondering if you're aware of states that had specific, let's say, training requirements, as we do, that other states may not have. For example, we require supervision training that's ongoing every few years, depending on for speech pathologists and for speech language pathologist assistants, supervision. So if we're in a compact with other states that don't have those kind of requirements, I'm just wondering how other states have dealt with that, if they have, because those people would not have the training that we require. I do see advantages in terms of issues related to shortages, having access to a lot more folks that could start work much earlier. I think that's great. But anyway, I think those are some of my questions, the difference in the qualifications.
Sure. So if it's a requirement that's related to the particular scope of practice in California, there can be additional requirements that you impose on a privilege holder. So if they were to be conducting supervision in California, they would be required to undergo that additional training if they weren't licensed to do so by their home state. So if it's something outside of the initial licensure requirements, if it's some sort of ongoing continuing education requirement that's required in the state in order to perform a certain function within California's scope, you would be able to enforce that for privilege holders.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I had that same question. I think it's a huge question, really. I want to make sure I understand how it works now. If there's a California licensee who wants to treat through telemedicine, telehealth, or some other form of hearing aid programming or whatever in Nevada, is that allowed now?
As long as they're licensed to practice in Nevada.
I would tell you, California law is based on where the patient is. And so our law would state that if the patient is in Nevada, you need to go look at Nevada's laws. And if Nevada requires a license to practice in Nevada, then you need that Nevada license. There are some states, I will tell you, like California, for psychologists, has temporary practice provisions that allow up to 30 days in a calendar year to be practiced there without obtaining the license. That's different for different professions, different boards, so on and so forth. So they could come in here and temporarily practice as a psychologist for 30 days. We do not have that. So again, if the patient's in another state, you need to follow that state's law. So if that state, Nevada, requires a license, you need a license in Nevada.
So they just have to be authorized to practice in the state where the patient is. So
Yeah.
in that case, they'd have to be authorized to practice in Nevada. Typically, that authorization is going to be a license, as far as I know, in every state.
Yeah. So a Wisconsin licensee cannot treat a California patient without holding California licensure.
Yes. And if they were, it'd be unlicensed practice.
Dr. Rajo, can I ask you a question? Thank you for the presentation. This is Paul Sanchez, Executive Officer of the Board. I had a question on, you alluded to required participation for enforcement cases, and I wanted to know if you could just elaborate on what that required participation would be on the investigative side.
Sure. So it mainly comes down to sharing information. So if there was somebody licensed in California who held privileges in other compact member states and violated the Practice Act, and that remote state came to California and asked for some information about the licensee, the compact states that you would have to cooperate with that request and provide them information. So it's mainly relates to information around investigations, litigation, or that sort of thing. So you wouldn't be required to actually conduct the investigation with the remote state. They're responsible for that. But in terms of sharing information, that's mainly what that point is getting at.
So investigative documents and the requirement of the participants would be to share investigative documents?
Once those have been finalized and their due process procedures have been followed, yes.
Okay, so similar to what we do now.
Yeah, as a part of any sort of final action taken. So not anything that's ongoing.
Okay, thank you.
So does the commission approve individuals? So if somebody had a conviction in another state, we normally look at a national database to determine that kind of information. But would you have that also and not allow them to participate? I'm asking that right?
Yeah, so the compact itself states that the only criminal history requirement for the applicant is that they can't have been found guilty of a felony related to the practice. And so if they maintain that, then they would be able to access the compact. You would be able to, in terms of issuing a privilege, you'd be able to make that determination yourself. If there's some sort of additional criminal history requirements that you have in place in California, like we don't want someone who has done this particular thing to practice in our state, you'd be able to make that determination as well. But the only kind of blanket ban across the board is felonies related to the practice.
And just as a point of clarification, this is Paul again. Our licensing board, I'm sure others have very similar processes for an interim suspension order when a licensee poses an immediate danger to the public. We may suspend someone's license until an arrest or a legal matter has been resolved in the courts. So they may not be convicted yet, but they would be suspended from practice. How is that handled among the compact members?
Sure. So the way it typically works is that you would share that information into the data system, and there would be a flag on that person, and that would go out to all the member states. So if the flag is essentially notifying the member states of the presence of significant investigative information that would pose an immediate threat to public health and safety. So it's not saying that anything final has been done. It's just saying this person is currently being investigated and they pose a threat, and then those remote states can then take any additional action that they deem necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Can you clarify for me if the licensee moves to a different state that participates in the compact, do they then have to change their licensing to that state in which they reside? Or if they're currently licensed in Utah and California is participating in the compact and then they move to California, do they get to just keep their Utah license because they're part of the compact?
Yeah, great question. So the compact is built on this concept of having a license in the state in which you primarily reside. And so they would have to...
Requirements. So would the same apply as if we had a secondary license approval, that they would need to go through that extra process to be dispensing audiologists?
Yes, yeah. If there's a secondary license for audiologists, they would need to get that additional license. So the compact privilege would not cover them to do hearing aid dispensing.
Okay, even though it's not a secondary license, it's just a different license type for an audiologist?
I believe so. I might need to clarify that, but I believe so.
This is Sharice Burns, the Assistant Executive Officer. I was curious, you talked about initial licensing fee, an initial fee that the state can charge, and the commission would charge its own. How does renewal of the privilege work, and is there a fee associated with renewal? So the ongoing costs of monitoring and checking in and taking action against privilege holders. Is there a renewal fee for the privilege?
Yep, there is a renewal fee, and it's typically just the same fee as the initial fee for the privilege. And it's the same concept where part of it goes to the commission and part of it goes back to the state.
I have another question. I'm just wondering if you're aware that most states who are participating now in the compact have to, the licensing boards that manage that, do they have to have additional personnel to just deal with interstate compact issues? Would you know?
Sure. So because the commission has just met for the first time in January, there's no data system in place yet. There's not any states that have actually been issuing privileges at this point. So we're still kind of in the implementation phase of getting this off the runway. So we've got 18 states on board. The data system is the infrastructure for that is being put in place. And so we think we'll be able to start issuing privileges soon, hopefully by the end of this calendar year. But there's not any states that have actually implemented this at this point yet.
Oh, I see. Okay, are there any other board questions? Any public members here in the audience who would like to ask anything, make any comments?
Hi, this is Gilda. I have a question. For the licensee, what is the application process? How do they initiate that?
Sure. So that's done via the commission. So you would go to the commission website and you would notify them that you're seeking a compact privilege. And if you have all of the proof of everything that you need to have in place, that you've met the requirements and you provide that to the commission, they can issue a privilege, like we said in the presentation, in a very short amount of time. So, and then once you're in there initially, once you've applied for one compact privilege, it's very easy to get additional privileges because all of that information is already in the data system. So there's no need to re-verify that or recheck it. It's already in there. So getting your first privilege might take a little bit longer because they're having to verify all of that primary source documentation. But once that's done, getting additional privileges beyond that is the PT Compact says that they can issue a privilege in 15 minutes, so it's very fast.
Sharice. This is Sharice. I just want to clarify. So it sounds like you're requiring some documents to be submitted by the licensee, or is that you're contacting the host state and asking for those documents to be provided from the staff at the home states board?
Yeah, so that would be the licensee would contact the commission, and the commission would contact the home state and ask for the required documentation. So that'd be evidence of their education and passing exam scores and things like that. All things that are required for the initial licensure process that the boards likely have on hand, and they provide that to the commission. But then once the commission has that information in the data system, there's no need to ask the home state for it again. They have it, and they can just issue the privileges very easily.
Usually I thought when we provided documents, there's a fee to do that.
There is, and I was just checking, is this going to be a resource that we have to provide the resources or the licensee does? So that's where I was double checking on that one.
Any other board questions or audience member questions? Seeing none, I'd like to open the public comment portal via WebEx.
We are now accepting public comments on WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, would you like to move to Ms. Dominguez?
Yes, please.
No one is present with me for public comment.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Schaefer, for coming to meet with us today, explaining everything about the Interstate Compact. I'm sure we'll be talking about it going forward, but I want to thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. And again, apologies for the difficulties with the audio.
No worries. We all deal with them. Thank you again. Okay, it is 12 o'clock, and we have an option here that we could attempt to get through item 13 before we go to lunch and into closed session, or would you like to break now for lunch and come back and do those two things? No, 13 is the legislative update. So there's a number of items to discuss, and Heather is here, but what was the...
Barreling on through, if we want to.
I do think that, I think that this topic might be more extensive than probably most of our topics, so this might be a good time to take a break. We are going to have to, even whether we take lunch now or later, we're going to have to come back for closed session, so it might be a good time to take lunch right now.
Okay, so why don't we adjourn for lunch, and we'll be back in by 12:30.
45? 45.
12:45? Okay.
That's Paul's way of making sure I come back for the close.